What are cryptocurrencies?
Would you describe it as a Ponzi scheme?
Yes, it's a Ponzi scheme.
It was a hyped up fraud.
But what you have is a gambling token. You don't have a currency.
They're a type of digital money, but instead of being controlled by a central government, they're decentralized using blockchain technology.
Cryptocurrency has become a very controversial subject in the world today, and for good reason. I have seen it firsthand, from a friend getting duped into buying an NFT that became worthless, to seeing crypto bros proudly show off their Web3 apps. There is a lot of nonsense in this cesspool of an industry. But in between all that nonsense, there may be some actual value behind some of the crypto regime. There are dozens of YouTube videos that will do a perfectly average job of explaining what crypto is and how it works. We're not going to do that today, for a couple reasons. There are two understandings people have of crypto. The first is the people having a grasp on the basic concepts, which describes the majority of people. And let's be honest, if you're watching this, I'm probably describing you. And the second are those who live and breathe crypto. I'm talking about people like developers, programmers, cryptographers, people who have a deep understanding of how it works and why it's important. And let's be honest again, those people have no reason to watch this video. The second reason is that you really only need to grasp the fundamentals in order to make sense of how this might, and I emphasize might, change the world. Any video seeking to explain the inner mechanisms of cryptography is lying to you, because it's a subject you simply can't learn from a couple YouTube videos, unless you are a genius like Stephen Hawking. If you really want to learn cryptography, you probably need to dedicate yourself and actually study for a substantial amount of time in order to really grasp how it functions on a deep level. Things like crypto don't just form from thin air. They exist to solve a problem. In this case, the problem they are solving is conventional banking. And to be fair, the sentiment around banking these days is bleak as we jump from recession to recession and continue to witness various institutions collapse. I'm looking at you, Silicon Valley Bank. So, how is crypto going to solve banking? Well, in a lot of ways. Banks have a lot of problems. They take fairly large fees for middleman services, like brokering loans. They close every day and take time to process transactions and so on. And to be fair, crypto can solve basically all those problems. But is any of that going to change the world? Probably not. And yet, it feels like these are the things we hear people constantly talk about when they talk about cryptocurrency. But for whatever reason, the one absolutely huge problem with banks, and the one that definitely needs solving, seems to be never brought up enough. They go bankrupt and collapse. And when that happens, they take everyone's money with them. And that is something that crypto might actually be able to contribute to in a positive manner. So how and why do banks collapse? Frankly, I find it shocking that they do at all. But to answer the question, the main way is pretty simple. The way this happens is people deposit their money in banks. When they do this, they lend their money to the bank, who holds on to it until they want it back. While they hold on to it, the agreement is that they can do basically whatever they want with that money. They can invest it in stocks, bonds, lend it out to other people. In exchange for that freedom, you, or whoever puts their money in the bank, the lender, gets interest on the money they lend, which is, in other words, considered a loan, until they take it back out. Fortunately, banks can occasionally make very dumb decisions and end up losing that money. When the bank doesn't have enough money to provide its customers with the deposits they request, it collapses. People sometimes refer to this as a bank run. On top of all that, this is exacerbated by the fact that banks are allowed to, and often do, loan out more money than they actually have in reserves on hand at any given time. This was deemed okay by regulation because money moves fluidly, and the assumption is that as long as they have enough money to cover any deposits, they'll be okay. This is the key concept that changes with decentralized finance. Decentralized finance platforms like smart contracts and, for example, a project called Compound operate on the premise of being over-collateralized. This means that borrowers must deposit more into the digital wallet than they're borrowing. Then, if the borrower can't repay their loan, the platform will liquidate the loan with the deposit that already occurred. And because the digital ledger runs on smart contracts, that process is automatically triggered, which means there's no cutting corners or avoiding the inevitable. This makes the system foolproof. And while those prerequisites might slow down speed and volume of transactions, they will ensure fewer, if any, collapses. And over the long run, that will lead to greater and more substantial growth. There are other ways in which crypto can really change day-to-day financial operations. The concept of decentralization is intense. If you take any big bank like Chase or Citibank, you need to understand that everything they do, the entire way they work, is designed to please their shareholders, their board of directors. They are trying to build a profitable business. And by contrast, that means their priority is nothing other than that, which leaves anyone else at risk. And you would be surprised at how deep the implications of something like that run. Crypto attempts to change that paradigm. It's a currency. It's not an institution or a public entity, so it has no ulterior motive. People throw buzzwords like blockchain around all the time without any clue what it actually means. Ultimately, the vast majority of changes crypto enables will likely be insignificant. Things like speeding up transactions are not really game-changing technologies. However, there is one capacity in which I really do believe cryptocurrency holds serious paradigm-shifting potential. And ironically, if banks had the logic to protect their own shortcomings, they would have found it first. The concept of over-collateralization may sound counterintuitive, but if it has even remote potential to prevent collapses or reduce the rate and frequency at which they happen, then they have simultaneously the potential to expedite growth in a way that we haven't seen in a very long time. Now, you might be wondering what the purpose of over-collateralizing a loan is, or what the benefit is. If you have enough collateral to fully fund or cover any loan you take out, wouldn't it just make more sense to use the money you already have to purchase whatever it is you were going to purchase? And that's a very valid question. The main reason you might use an over-collateralized loan is to exploit a loophole called capital gains tax. Essentially, when you use your own funds and your own personal assets to make a transaction, you will need to pay capital gains tax on it. However, loans aren't subject to capital gains tax. If you take out a loan, and in this case, you use cryptocurrency to take out an over-collateralized loan, in other words, trading your actual assets for loan, then you can put yourself in a somewhat advantageous position because loans are not subject to capital gains tax. Another key point worth calling out here is that in the context of DeFi and these loans that exist in projects like Compound, interest rates commonly don't exist or aren't a factor, which is, for obvious reasons, a huge differentiator. As I'm sure many of you know, when you take out a loan from an institutional bank, you typically are charged an interest rate. You have to pay that loan back over time, and as you pay it back, you have to pay it back with interest rate that could be fixed or could increase and cause you to owe more money over time. In the context of these DeFi projects, that interest rate is taken out of the equation. This makes sense for two reasons. One, it makes the loan much more attractive, and two, because the loan is over-collateralized, there isn't nearly as much risk for the lendee or the person sending the money to need to cover their bases with an interest rate. They know that they have lent the money to an entity that has plenty of funds and plenty of room to cover any potential losses or damages. Obviously, cryptocurrency remains an extremely broad and conceptual domain. And frankly, I think anyone who claims to know with certainty what the future holds with regard to crypto or otherwise is naive. That said, I do feel like when people talk about crypto, they focus on the wrong things and they bring up these breakthroughs, quote unquote, that really aren't that game changing. They're not things that will revolutionize the way we live our day-to-day life. However, when you think of the concept of a loan that you've basically already paid for, that you don't pay any interest on, that if the whole world kind of adapted would allow people to work together and collaborate more quickly and more easily and connect from all over the place without having to pay fees to middlemen or focus only within certain institutions or certain countries and break free of all those borders, then it does become a little bit easier to see what kind of impact digital currency could actually have on the world. On top of that, it is important to note that cryptocurrency is still incredibly young, and we most likely have seen only the very beginning of what impact it will have. So it's hard to say, but it is clear that there's a very interesting future ahead of us.